Is a man truly virtuous if he only acts justly because a god is watching? When the golden light of authority is permanently extinguished, morality ceases to be a law of physics. It becomes an agonizing choice. Our king has dragged his colossal vessel across the threshold into the uncharted dead silence of the halo stars. The psychic tether to the Imperium is severed. But before the absolute rot of apathy consumes the throne, observe the anomaly of human decency. Witness the final, desperate stand of a man trying to be good in a universe that actively punishes mercy. Direct the analytical gaze away from the gilded command bridge and descend into the lightless, suffocating bowels of the flagship. The vessel has crossed into the halo stars. The navigators are blind. The Astronomican is gone. A primal, suffocating terror grips the hundreds of thousands of souls trapped in the lower decks. Without the Emperor's light to guide them, the void-born serfs teeter on the edge of absolute madness. Panic threatens to tear the ship apart from the inside. Yet in this overwhelming darkness, an anomaly emerges, a beacon of profound, irrational humanity. Consider the figure of Enforcer Kaelen. Kaelen is a veteran of the ship's internal security caste, a man raised on the brutal, uncompromising doctrines of the Lex Imperialis, taught to solve every mathematical variable with the strike of an electromaul. But when the great darkness falls, and the high-born officers retreat behind heavily armored bulkheads to protect themselves, Kaelen does not draw his weapon. He looks at the terrified, starving masses of the manufacturum sectors, and a profound sense of duty supersedes his programming. He chooses to become a shield. Observe the raw, agonizing beauty of his defiance. A localized plasma conduit ruptures in Sector 4, venting lethal, irradiated steam into a densely populated hab block. The cold, logical protocol of the ship dictates that the bulkheads must be immediately sealed, sacrificing the thousands trapped inside to preserve the structural integrity of the adjacent decks. It is the Imperial way: amputate the limb to save the body. The order is given from the bridge. The heavy steel doors begin to grind shut. But Kaelen disobeys. He physically wedges his armored shoulder into the closing gears of the primary blast door, screaming for his squad to hold the line. He does not wear the sealed environmental armor of the nobility. He breathes the toxic air, his skin blistering from the heat as he wades into the blinding steam. He pulls crushed workers from beneath fallen support beams. He carries weeping children out of the irradiated zone, passing them to safety just moments before the fail-safe mechanisms finally shatter his grip and lock the sector down. He sacrifices his own physical health, his own lungs, and his pristine military record simply to grant the lowest caste of the ship another day of life. This is the manifestation of the ultimate defiance. Kaelen believes that the absence of the Imperium is not a license to become a monster, but a rare, golden opportunity to finally administer true justice. He attempts to hold back the infinite dark, not with archaic prayers or dogmatic faith, but with the bruised, bleeding hands of a man who simply wants his people to survive long enough to see another sunrise. He shares his own meager water rations with the sick. He patrols the rusted catwalks not as a tyrant but as a guardian. To the wretched souls of the lower decks, he is a savior. He provides a tangible, beating heart to a cold machine. It is a profoundly intoxicating illusion. To witness this level of sacrifice in the grim darkness of the galaxy forces the mind to believe that hope can survive in a vacuum. It forces the observer to believe that perhaps, against all astronomical odds, compassion can be a sustainable mechanism of survival. But the void is patient. The void is devoid of emotion, and the cold mathematics of the halo stars are merely waiting for this fragile, beautiful heroism to exhaust its very limited resources. Observe the fatal flaw in the architecture of heroism. It is a beautiful, intoxicating sentiment, but sentiment cannot synthesize purified water, nor can it generate atmospheric oxygen. As the flagship drifts deeper into the lightless expanse of the halo stars, the localized reality of the vessel asserts its dominance over Kaelen's fragile morality. The void does not actively attack him. It simply waits for the cold, unforgiving mathematics of attrition to take their toll. Compassion in a closed and deteriorating ecosystem is an incredibly expensive commodity. By refusing to seal Sector 4, Kaelen saved thousands of lives, but he inadvertently crippled the atmospheric recyclers for the entire lower deck. The irradiated dust he dragged in with the survivors begins to clog the ancient filtration systems. Men and women he pulled from the wreckage begin to cough up blood, requiring medical supplies that simply do not exist. He gave them an extra week of life, only to ensure that their eventual deaths would be agonizingly slow and drain the sector's remaining resources. Watch the physical and psychological degradation of a righteous man. Kaelen works without sleep, his own body failing from radiation exposure. He surrenders his personal rations to starving children, slowly starving himself in the process. He attempts to mediate violent disputes over scraps of protein, bleeding from wounds inflicted by the very people he swore to protect. The terrified serfs, operating purely on feral survival instincts, do not see a savior anymore. They see a dwindling resource. They begin to swarm him, begging, clawing at his armor, demanding miracles that his mortal hands cannot provide. This is the crushing revelation of the Grimdark universe, the cruel, calculating doctrines of the Imperium, the immediate execution of the sick, the venting of damaged sectors, the absolute subjugation of the weak, were not born merely from malice. They were born from a terrifying, necessary logic to keep humanity alive in a hostile galaxy. Kaelen's mercy is not a cure, it is a systemic infection. He realizes with a sickening clarity that by trying to save everyone, he is actively accelerating the death of the entire deck. The weight of this responsibility begins to fracture his mind. He stands on the rusted catwalks, looking down at the sea of desperate, dying faces staring back up at him. They are waiting for salvation, but the storerooms are empty. The medici bays are graveyards. The heroism that defined him has become a terminal disease, and the heroic flame within his chest begins to flicker, starving for oxygen in a universe that simply does not care. The breaking point of a human soul rarely arrives with a dramatic explosion or the roar of a demonic entity. More often, it arrives in absolute silence. For Kaelen, the anchor shatters on the 34th day in the halo stars, triggered not by a grand tragedy, but by a pathetic, desperate crime. A lower-deck worker, a man whose skin is gray from malnutrition, breaks into Kaelen's private quarters and steals a single, sanctioned medical stim, the very last vial that was keeping Kaelen's irradiated lungs functioning. By the ancient Lex Imperialis, the punishment for stealing from an enforcer is an immediate, brutal public execution. Even under Kaelen's new, enlightened philosophy, justice demands some form of restitution to maintain order. Kaelen tracks the thief down. He drags the weeping, terrified man to the edge of the nearest observation deck, overlooking the primary airlock. A crowd of thousands gathers in the dim emergency lighting. They watch with hollow, sunken eyes, waiting to see what their fallen hero will do. Will he show mercy and let the thief go unpunished, thereby proving that the law is dead? Or will he strike the man down, proving that his compassion was a lie all along? Kaelen raises his heavy electromaul. The weapon hums, preparing to crack the thief's skull. But as the maul reaches its apex, Kaelen stops. He does not look at the weeping thief. He does not look at the desperate crowd. He looks past them through the massive reinforced armor glass of the observation window and stares directly into the infinite, dead blackness of the halo stars. There is no Astronomican. There is no emperor watching from a golden throne. There are no high lords waiting to audit his decision. In that quiet, terrible moment, the last fragment of Kaelen's morality violently evaporates. He realizes that if he crushes this man's skull, the void will not cheer for justice. If he drops the weapon and embraces the man, the void will not weep for his mercy. Right and wrong are merely imaginary concepts, ghosts of a dead world that they packed in their cargo holds. In a universe devoid of meaning, every action is equally pointless. With absolutely no anger, no malice, and no sorrow in his heart, Kaelen simply lowers his weapon. He turns to the control panel, grabs the thief by the collar, throws him into the airlock, and pulls the atmospheric release lever. He does not do it to enforce the law. He does not do it for revenge. He watches the man freeze, crystallize, and shatter into dust in the vacuum, purely to see if the universe will react. It does not. The void remains silent, empty, and perfectly indifferent. The hero is dead, only the abyss remains. Observe the reaction of the throne to the death of virtue. The rogue king watched Enforcer Kaelen's quiet atrocity through the grainy emerald feed of the command bridge's pict screens, and the monarch did not order the enforcer executed. He did not dispatch a discipline squad. Instead, sitting alone in the heavy shadows of his sanctum, the rogue trader simply understood. He witnessed the precise moment a loyal hound realized there was no longer a master holding the leash, and he felt the exact same profound, terrifying emptiness echoing within his own chest. To comprehend this total systemic collapse, one must understand the geography of the halo stars. It is a fundamental error to equate this region with the howling madness of the warp. The Imperium is a realm of screaming, malevolent chaos. It hates humanity and actively seeks to consume it. But out here, beyond the furthest reach of the Astronomican, there is no chaos. There is only the great silence. This is a graveyard of meaning, a region of space so profoundly ancient and dead that it rejects the very concept of narrative. Within this absolute vacuum, the rigid, comforting laws of physical reality begin to evaporate like mist. Chronometers spin aimlessly, measuring hours that stretch into agonizing eternities or compress into fractured seconds. Navigational cogitators continuously output mathematical paradoxes. The colossal void ship sails through massive dead nebulae that subconsciously resemble the petrified faces of forgotten gods, entities that did not die in glorious battle, but simply perished from sheer cosmic boredom, their giant dusty eyes unjudging and blind to the ship passing below them. When the physical universe vehemently refuses to obey the basic parameters of logic, the mortal mind physically cannot sustain the illusion of morality. One cannot maintain a civilized, law-abiding society when the iron floor beneath one's boots forgets the concept of gravity. The Codex Imperialis, the very sacred text that governed every breath of their existence back within the borders of the Imperium, becomes nothing more than fading ink on dead wood. Without the oppressive structure of terror to act as a psychological anchor, the mind violently detaches and floats away into absolute nihilism. The rogue trader realizes, with a sickening crystalline clarity, that the tyranny of the High Lords was never just a political cage. It was a necessary mechanism. It was the only force keeping the human psyche from unraveling into total schizophrenia. By leaving the Emperor's light, he has not discovered a liberating new reality. He has entered a void where reality itself is merely a polite, easily discarded suggestion. The contagion of apathy has breached the hull, and it is spreading far faster than any biological plague. Apathy is a terminal condition, but apathy, when combined with absolute unchecked authority, becomes the ultimate catalyst for an entirely new classification of hell. What began with one broken enforcer and one silent airlock soon infects the very crown of the expedition. The king is surrounded by an infinite emptiness, and the psychological pressure of that silence becomes unbearable. He desperately needs to feel a pulse. He needs to prove that he still exists in a universe that actively refuses to acknowledge his presence. Consequently, the scale of the horror naturally escalates. Observe the shift in his methodology. He does not declare war upon his own crew. War requires passion. War requires a fundamental belief that one side is righteous and the other is flawed. War is too human. Instead, the king begins to experiment. Operating from a place of sterile curiosity, he targets Sector 4, the very same densely populated hab block that Kaelen sacrificed his soul to save. With a single emotionless command, the rogue trader orders the life support and atmospheric synthesizers to that specific sector reduced by exactly 50%. He does not initiate this decree as a blood sacrifice to summon a dark entity. He does not do it because the primary plasma reactors are lacking power. He initiates the slow starvation of oxygen simply to observe human desperation in a controlled, isolated environment. He sits upon his gilded observation deck, sipping vintage Amasec, watching through the lumen screens as the air grows thin. He watches mothers violently bludgeon each other over failing rebreathers. He watches communities that had worked together in perfect harmony for decades devolve into feral packs of rabid animals in a matter of weeks. He watches them suffer and die with the cold, detached, clinical gaze of an academic studying insects trapped beneath a pane of armor glass. The crew of the lower decks stops viewing him as a king. A king is a political entity. A king can be reasoned with, petitioned, or overthrown. They begin to view him as a cosmic event, an unfeeling, unpredictable natural disaster that can obliterate entire generations without a second thought, much like a solar flare or a tectonic fracture. When human life entirely loses its sacred divine context, it ceases to be a tragedy when it ends. A catastrophic convergence of mass death becomes nothing more than a statistical anomaly on a logistics data slate. The proud, ambitious monarch who left Terra has quietly died in his sleep. In his place sits a cold, calculating architect of suffering, perfectly adapted to the meaningless dark. Observe the final evolution of a mind that has successfully discarded its soul. Absolute apathy, while philosophically liberating for a tyrant, eventually presents a significant logistical problem. A man cannot simply stare into the infinite, silent void forever. Eventually, the void demands administration. The rogue king, sitting upon his shadowed throne, realized that a universe without inherent meaning is not a tragedy to be mourned. It is an unprecedented industrial opportunity. When a ruler systematically strips a human being of their divinity, their rights, and their cosmic significance, what remains? The clinical eye sees only raw materials, meat, bone, labor hours, genetic sequences. The hundreds of thousands of citizens dwelling in the rusted, freezing bowels of the flagship are no longer subjects to be governed or souls to be saved. They have been reclassified. They are inventory to be managed. They are biological fuel for a machine that has forgotten its original purpose. The enforcers, following the lead of the broken Kaelen, have ceased to carry their electromauls to punish sinners or maintain the Emperor's peace. Instead, they now carry data slates to tally stock. The Medicae bays have been repurposed. They no longer function to treat the sick or heal the wounded, but to harvest the strong and recycle the failing. The rogue trader did not build a new, enlightened society in the halo stars. He built a high-efficiency slaughterhouse. He organized the great, meaningless silence into a perfectly calibrated machine of systemic exploitation. He has replaced the warmth of human faith and the weight of the law with the freezing, undeniable mathematics of supply and demand. Every scream in the lower decks is now measured by its impact on productivity. Every death is calculated as a loss of potential energy. The king has successfully proven that the void has no meaning. And having found that vacuum, he has begun to fill it with the only thing that remains in the absence of God, the architecture of absolute industrialized despair. The transition is complete. The monarch who once sought a paper crown of freedom has found a much heavier mantle. He has become the architect of a hell that functions with the clockwork precision of a cathedral, but without a single prayer to echo through its halls. He has assigned a price tag to the meaningless, and the market is about to open. A king without boundaries is ultimately just a prisoner of his own hollow architecture. He sought absolute freedom in the uncharted dark, believing he could outrun the shadow of his masters. But when the universe is stripped of its meaning, and when every atrocity feels no more significant than a breath of air, the mind does not expand. It collapses inward. The moral anchor did not merely shatter, it was melted down and reforged into a new, terrifying currency. The king has crossed the final threshold of his humanity, leaving a trail of frozen dust and broken spirits in his wake. A system that feeds upon its own pulse is a system that has already reached its end, yet it continues to grind forward, fueled by the sheer inertia of its own cruelty. If the cold reality of this descent has left a mark upon your conscience, ensure your presence is recorded in the archives. Subscribe to the Chronicle and leave a trace of your own humanity in the comments before it too is reclassified as data. The Rogue King has found his freedom. He has built his empire in the silence, but consider the weight of the transactions he is about to authorize. When the value of a soul is reduced to zero, what is the market price for a pound of human flesh?